The large river rolled and flowed swiftly, becoming a giant natural trench separating two worlds. On the northern bank, 70,000 expeditionary troops from the west had set up camp, stretching more than 10 miles along the water's edge, opposite on the other side of the river. The army of the southern kingdom, with a strength of up to 90,000 men, had arranged their battle formation ready, creating a solid defensive wall without gaps. Colorful banners fluttered vigorously in the wind, signaling the presence of a mighty force with hundreds of war chariots and huge mobile watchtowers. However, what made the expeditionary army most apprehensive was not the number of infantry, but the dark, bulky masses standing scattered along the riverbank, the herd of war elephants, hundreds of giant beasts armored with iron on heads and chests, standing tall like mobile fortresses, ready to crush anyone who dared to set foot on the alluvial plain. For 7 consecutive days and nights, the Western generals did not send troops across the river, but executed a brutal psychological tactic. Whenever night fell, the sound of horns and battle drums would rise rapidly, tearing apart the silence of the night. Thousands of heavy cavalry were ordered to move thunderously along the riverbank, torches lighting up a whole corner of the sky, creating the feeling that a large-scale general offensive was about to begin. Rafts and small boats were pushed into the water, shouting echoing over to the other bank. At the headquarters of the Southern Kingdom, a tense atmosphere prevailed. As soon as strange noises were heard, the entire 90,000 troops were immediately ordered to alert. Mahouts hurriedly urged elephants out to the water's edge. Infantry holding long spears ran into battle positions, straining eyes into the pitch-black night waiting for the enemy. They stood soaking in cold mist and mud for many hours, hearts beating, thumping along with each drumbeat echoing from the other bank. But then, just as dawn broke, the noise from the Western Army side suddenly fell silent. Their cavalry turned back to camp. The rafts were pulled onto the shore. No arrows were fired. No landing took place. The Southern Army had to wearily disband the formation, dragging steps back to tents with dark circles under eyes due to lack of sleep. This cat-and-mouse game repeated continuously, wearing down the spirit and physical strength of the defending troops. By the 8th night, when pitch-black clouds from the horizon pulled in to obscure the moonlight, signaling a great storm was about to strike, the vigilance of the Southern Army had decreased significantly. They began to believe that the noise across the river was just a harmless feint as usual, unaware that a bold, deadly plan was being silently implemented under the cover of thunder and lightning. When night fell, a major storm from upstream struck exactly as predicted by the priests. Rain poured down like a waterfall. Thunder and lightning tore across the pitch-black sky, and the roaring of the rising river drowned out all sounds of metal clashing, taking advantage of nature's chaos. A special force consisting of 5,000 heavy cavalry and 6,000 elite infantry of the Western Army quietly separated from the main camp. They moved upstream, marching rapidly through thorny bushes and slippery swamps to reach a desolate bend about 18 miles from the main camp. Meanwhile, at the position opposite the main force of the Southern Kingdom, the remaining army continued to maintain the diversion. They burned large bonfires despite the rain and wind, blowing horns and beating drums continuously. Fake shouts echoed through the curtain of rain, riveting the attention of the defending troops to the familiar alluvial plain, making them completely unaware of the dangerous spearhead moving on the far flank. At the secret crossing point, the atmosphere was suffocatingly urgent. Small animal hide-covered boats previously disassembled were now being reassembled quickly. Rafts made of hollow tree trunks were tied tightly together to carry horses and heavy equipment. Under the flashing lightning, thousands of soldiers waded splashing into the freezing water, pushing war machines onto the rafts. The river crossing took place in extremely harsh conditions. The rolling floodwaters wanted to tear apart the fragile rafts. War horses neighed in panic at the fierce waves, causing soldiers to struggle to hold the reins to keep them standing still on the slippery planks. Some rafts were swept away by the water, crashing into submerged rocks and shattering, drowning both men and horses into the deep swirling water. However, the order of silence was still strictly obeyed. No cry for help was allowed to be uttered to avoid revealing the position. In midstream, a small island full of reeds became a temporary resting station. The vanguard, soaked and shivering with cold, quickly reorganized the ranks. They tied their shoelaces tightly, checking bowstrings that had been carefully wrapped in waterproof leather cases. When the last raft docked on the muddy bank on the other side of the river, the rain began to subside. By this time, it was dimly lit dawn. The Western cavalry quickly climbed onto their horses, forming a sharp spearhead formation. Infantry carrying round shields jogged behind, trying to keep up with the horses' speed. They had set foot on enemy territory, but the element of surprise was about to pass as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick clouds, shining on soaked armor reflecting glittering light. As soon as sunlight pierced the cloth, shining on the soaked flags of the expeditionary army just stepping onto the shore. Scouts of the southern kingdom hiding in reed bushes immediately detected the danger. The sound of alarm horns pierced the wind, echoing towards the main camp a few miles away. Realizing there could be no delay, a rapid response force of 2,000 cavalry and over 100 war chariots was immediately deployed to intercept the enemy right at the alluvial plain before the expeditionary army could finish arranging their formation. The ground shook violently under horse hooves and ironclad wheels. The southern chariot team rushed in with terrifying speed, creating an overwhelming aura. Each chariot was pulled by 4 strong horses, carrying a driver and 2 archers or javelin throwers. They intended to use the crushing power of chariots to crush the tired and cold Western soldiers. However, the storm last night had accidentally become an ally of the expeditionary army. The alluvial plain by the river, usually dry on normal days, now had turned into a mushy swamp. When the heavy war chariots rushed into the soft ground, the ironwood wheels immediately sank deep into the mud. Speed, their most powerful weapon, was suddenly eliminated. The horses pulling the cart slipped, neighing in panic, disrupting the entire attack formation. Seizing the opportunity, the Western heavy cavalry, with war horses significantly larger than the native horses, began the counterattack. Unflinching before the rain of arrows fired from the stuck chariots, they urged horses to rush straight into the enemy formation. The sound of clashing metal rang out harsh as long spears slammed into wooden shields and leather armor. At the center of the skirmish, the scene became extremely chaotic. The warriors on the chariots, now becoming fixed targets, were forced to jump into the mud to fight hand-to-hand. Western cavalry took advantage of the height advantage, swinging curved swords slashing down torrentially. Blood dyed the stagnant puddles red. Some chariots tried to turn around to flee but crashed into each other, causing the axles to break in two, throwing soldiers to the ground, only to be trampled mercilessly by horses' hooves of both sides. The captain commanding the Southern Rapid Response Force died right in the first series of skirmishes, when hit in the chest by a thrown javelin. Losing the commander plus the disadvantage of terrain, the southern remnants began to crumble. Surviving cavalry hurriedly cut the reins, leaving the chariots behind, turning to flee for their lives towards the main army to report the bad news. Meanwhile, the Western infantry force in the rear had managed to land completely on the shore. They quickly advanced to clear the battlefield, finishing off the wounded and pushing the wreckage of war chariots to the sides to open the way for the main army to advance deep into the interior. Although winning the first clash, but the element of surprise was about to pass. In the distance, dust began to rise billowingly. The main army of the Southern Kingdom, along with the herd of giant war elephants, was rumbling forward. The ground began to shake with an intensity stronger than the thunder last night, signaling the appearance of the main force of the Southern Kingdom. From the horizon, a giant dust cloud rolled up, obscuring even the early morning sunlight. When the dust curtain gradually settled, a majestic and terrifying scene appeared before the eyes of the expeditionary army. A defensive wall of flesh and blood more than 4 miles long, formed from more than 200 giant war elephants. Each of these beasts was a living killing machine. They were draped in multi-layered thick buffalo hide armor, studded with bronze nails on the forehead and chest to resist projectile. On the back of each elephant was a watchtower made of wood painted with vermilion and gold, carrying 3 or 4 soldiers. A driver sitting on the neck holding an iron hook. 2 snipers firing from above and a soldier throwing long javelins. Standing alternating in the gaps between the elephant rows were tens of thousands of elite infantry, hands clutching large shields and broadswords, ready to surge up and slaughter anyone who survived the elephant's charge. Facing that giant block of steel, the Western Army formation looked much more fragile. However, they quickly deployed a disciplined defensive formation. The main infantry block in the center lowered spears more than 5 meters long, creating a forest of spikes pointing forward. The ranks stood close together, shoulder to shoulder, shield touching shield, forming a solid block. Noticing the smell and growling of the strange elephants causing the war horses to start panicking, refusing to obey the reins, the Western cavalry commanders decided not to confront head-on. They split the entire 6,000 cavalry to the right flank, moving in an arc to stay away from the influence of the beasts, while looking for weaknesses in the enemy formation's flank. Battle drums from the Southern Army suddenly beat rapidly like exploding thunder, following the signal from the commander's flag. The line of war elephants simultaneously roared deafening sounds, raising trunks to the sky as a challenge, then starting to stride heavily forward. The ground beneath the expeditionary army shook violently with each step of the herd. The atmosphere on the battlefield was thick with the scent of murderous intent. The first arrows from the elephant towers were fired, tearing the wind rushing down onto the Western infantry formation like a rain shower. Wooden shields shook violently when receiving the shooting force from above. The distance between the two armies narrowed gradually. On one side, a wall of long spears, silent and cold. On the other side, a storm of flesh and bone rushing in with the power of 1,000 weights. The terrifying collision between two civilizations was about to break out, promising to turn the riverside plain into a giant meat grinder. The cold sound of horns rose from the right flank of the Western Army, launching a preemptive attack before the elephant mass could touch the infantry ranks. 5,000 heavy cavalry, those who had separated earlier, simultaneously urged horses to rush forward like a giant arrow shot into the opponent's left flank. They did not aim at the terrifying elephants, but focused on destroying the fragile escort cavalry force of the Southern Kingdom. The collision took place at terrible speed. The Southern cavalry, used to fighting on chariots or flexible small horses, were completely overshadowed by the crushing power of the large ironclad war horses. The flank defensive formation was torn apart immediately. Long swords slashed down mercilessly, knocking Southern knights off their horses. Overwhelmed in number and strength, the Southern cavalry remnants were forced to retreat deep into the center, accidentally crashing into the very formation of war elephants moving up, causing the first local chaos. Meanwhile, on the central front, the battle against the mobile fortresses began in the most brutal way. Thousands of Western archers and javelin throwers were ordered to advance in front of the long spear fence. Their goal was not to kill the animal immediately. The thick skin of war elephants made that impossible, but to cause extreme pain to make them lose control. "Aim for the eyes! Aim for the trunk!" Orders were shouted hoarsely. A black rain of arrows shot up into the sky, then plunged down onto the heads of the leading beasts. Resin-soaked arrows burning with a hiss stuck into the wrinkled skin, into the sensitive soft parts at the trunk and ears. The sound of elephants roaring in pain echoed throughout the battlefield, drowning out even the thunder from the horizon. The beasts hit by arrows in the eyes began to shake their heads frantically, throwing the mahouts sitting on the neck to the ground, where they were immediately trampled under the giant feet of their own pets. In response, the archers on the elephant towers fired back fiercely. They had the absolute high ground advantage, easily aiming at the exposed spots on the neck and shoulders of the Western infantry. Long javelins launched from the high tower pierced through both shields and armor, pinning the soldier tight to the muddy ground. Blood began to flow in streams mixing with rainwater. Although attacked fiercely by arrows and javelins, the inertia of the war elephant mass did not decrease at all. The leading beasts, with eyes bloodshot from anger and pain, still trudged forward, knocking away obstacles blocking the way. The distance between the two corps was now only calculated by a few dozen steps. The Western long spear soldiers gritted their teeth, stomped feet firmly into the mud, preparing to receive the 1,000-pound collision about to arrive. The moment of collision between two opposing military forces created a terrifying sound never before seen, drowning out even the thunder rolling in the sky. Dozens of leading war elephants with momentum weighing tons crashed into the wall of long spears of the Western army. The sound of wood snapping crackled dryly, mixed with the sound of bones shattering and the screams of the first line of soldiers crushed instantly. However, the Western infantry block did not break at all. With iron discipline forged through hundreds of battles, the rear ranks immediately stepped up to fill the gaps, pressing spear handles tight to the ground to create leverage. Spears more than 5 meters long, sharp as razor blades, pierced the thick skin and plunged deep into the chests and throats of the beasts. There were elephants with 3 or 4 spears stuck simultaneously in the brisket, roaring in pain then collapsing, crushing soldiers who could not jump away in time. The scene at the front line became a bloody nightmare. Frenzied elephants used trunks to knock down, grabbing soldiers then tossing them into the air like rag dolls. Their ironclad tusks tossed up whole sections of the formation, tearing armor and soldier bodies into pieces. Human blood and animal blood mixed together, dyeing a large strip of land red, turning the ground already mushy from rain into a slippery, deadly quagmire. On the elephant backs, the southern soldiers were also not safe. When the beasts rampaged in pain, the wooden towers on their backs shook violently. Many archers were thrown down into the bristling sea of spears below, where they were immediately skewered before touching the ground. Those who could still hold on desperately threw javelins and shot arrows down at the infantry crowd surrounding the elephant feet, trying to relieve the siege for their mount. Despite terrible casualties, the Western infantry block still trudged forward step by step to the rhythm of the whistle signal. They took advantage of the length of the spear, stabbing straight into elephant eyes and trunks from a safe distance. This cruel tactic began to take effect. The heavily injured elephants began to lose control, no longer obeying the mahouts' orders. Instead of advancing, they began to back up, turning around and ramming indiscriminately into anything blocking the way, including their own teammates behind. At the same time, Western light infantry teams carrying axes and daggers slipped through the gaps in the long spear formation. They risked their lives rushing close to the elephant feet, using axes to chop hard into the rear leg tendons of the giant beasts. A leading elephant with a severed leg tendon crashed to the ground with a shocking noise, pulling down the collapse of an entire section of the southern battle line. The center of the battlefield had now completely broken down, turning into a hell on earth where the boundary between the two sides was blurred by the madness of the wild beasts. The war elephants, once the pride of the southern kingdom, had now become a nightmare for their own masters. Tortured by thousands of arrows and bleeding wounds, the herd lost all reason, roaring pitiful sounds, then turned and ran wildly, knocking down every obstacle blocking the escape route. Tens of thousands of southern infantry following close behind to support the attack suddenly fell into a trap. They were stuck between the enemy's wall of long spears in front and the giant masses of flesh backing up from behind. No way back. The poor soldiers were trampled by the very divine beasts they worshipped. The sound of breaking bones, desperate cries for help, were drowned under feet as big as communal house pillars. An entire solid phalanx formation was plowed into pulp in just an instant, creating winding dark red blood furrows on the muddy ground. Taking advantage of that chaos, Western light infantry surged up like water bursting a bank. They threw away the cumbersome long spears, drawing battle axes and short daggers to rush into close combat. Groups of 3 to 5 soldiers coordinated rhythmically, surrounding each exhausted elephant, one attracting attention in front, one slipping behind using an axe to chop hard into the leg tendon, one climbing up a high pile of corpses to jump onto the elephant's back, stabbing a knife into the mahout's neck. The wooden towers on elephant backs collapsed to the ground one by one like buildings in an earthquake, crushing both soldiers on the tower and soldiers on the ground. Heavily injured elephants fell over. Their giant bodies became mounds of obstacles dividing the battlefield into hundreds of small pieces. There, bloody skirmishes took place, fragmented, but more brutal than ever. Soldiers of both sides wrestled each other in the mud, using helmets to bash each other's faces, using bare hands to strangle each other when weapons were broken. Blood from human and elephant bodies spilled out, mixing into the rising river water, turning a mile-long stretch of river into a dark red color. The strong, fishy smell of blood mixed with the smell of animal dung and mud rose pungently, causing many soldiers to vomit while fighting. In the drizzle that had just returned, the scene of killing took place slowly and sullenly. No more cheering, only the gasping and growling of those snatching life from the hands of death, while the center of the battlefield was writhing in the death throes of war elephants. Then at the far flank, the fate of the battle was officially decided by the decisive strike from the Western cavalry force, the army of 5,000 ironclad knights. After defeating the patrol force on the left wing and executing a large arc wrapping around to the enemy's rear, now appeared like messengers of death from within the screen of mist and dust. The sound of horns signaling the general offensive rang out from behind the Southern Kingdom's army, sowing extreme terror in the hearts of those busy fighting at the front. Realizing they were surrounded, Southern generals desperately ordered reserve ranks to turn spears around to cope. But every effort to rotate formation in the tight space at this moment was impossible. The Western cavalry rushed into the nape of the opponent's formation with unstoppable power. No longer keeping a horizontal formation, they split into sharp spearheads, gouging deep into the weakest points of the panicked troop mass. Large Western warhorses protected by bronze chest armor, knocking away groups of light infantry trying to set up a barrier. Heavy curved swords swung up and down rhythmically like jackhammers, striking down on the heads and shoulders of enemies turning their backs to them. Pressed hard from behind, the Southern cavalry remnants and rear infantry were pushed forward like a reverse tide. The real tragedy began when this mass of people and horses was pressed tight against the chaotic wall in the center, the frenzied elephants and the trapped infantry block. A horrifying, crushing scene took place. Tens of thousands of people were driven into an area so narrow they could not swing their arms holding weapons. Soldiers in the middle were squeezed until ribs broke, suffocating to death before the enemy's blade touched. War horses and war elephants, agitated by the smell of blood and the tightness, began biting and trampling anything underfoot to find space. The poor Southern cavalrymen were stuck between two pincers. Behind were the blades of Western cavalry. In front were the tusks and trunks of their own divine beasts. In desperation, many knights had to drive horses straight into elephant legs, only to have both man and horse tossed into the sky or crushed to pulp. The encirclement tightened gradually. The initial neat chessboard formation of the Southern Kingdom had now turned into a round, chaotic blob, being peeled away gradually from the outer edges by the ruthless and disciplined attacks of the expeditionary army. No more orders were heard, no flag remained standing. Only naked survival instinct remained amidst the sea of blood and mud. Human endurance has a limit, and that limit was completely broken when the great banner embroidered with the divine beast of the Southern Kingdom army was broken by a heavy javelin, collapsing into the black mud. The image of the collapsed symbol of power was like a final knife cut, severing the fragile spiritual thread of 90,000 soldiers. The sound of the horn ordering retreat rang out weakly, but in the chaos it turned into a signal for a disorganized and humiliating rout. The defensive formation crumbled in large chunks. Southern soldiers discarded shields, helmets, and heavy weapons to run faster. But ironically, their only escape route led straight to the bank of the rolling flood river, where so many comrades had been buried the night before. The pursuit took place brutally right at the heels of those fleeing. The herd of war elephants, now completely out of control due to pain and panic, turned and fled by instinct. They became giant steamrollers, plowing through their own ranks, crowding on the narrow single path. Horrified screams rang out as hundreds of soldiers were thrown into deep mud pits, only to be trampled by dozens of huge elephant feet until their forms were unrecognizable. At the river's edge, the tragedy reached its climax. Tens of thousands of troops clumped together by the water, squeezed tight between the cold, freezing current in front and the swords of the expeditionary army behind. In extreme despair, many risked their lives plunging into the murky river, trying to swim to the other bank or clinging to floating pieces of wood from broken chariots. But the floodwaters after last night's storm flowed swiftly like a waterfall, sweeping weak bodies far away, drowning them in deadly whirlpools. On the shore, Western archers and javelin throwers lined up horizontally, coldly performing the work of executioners. Volleys of arrows fired rhythmically, sticking into the backs of those trying to swim to midstream. The water surface foamed white with thousands of flailing arms, then quickly turned into patchy dark red. Bodies of men and horses floated listlessly, bumping into each other with clunking sounds, forming rafts of corpses stuck at the bends of the river. The Western cavalry continued to sweep along the alluvial plain, hunting down small groups trying to hide in the reed bushes. No mercy was granted. Surrendered prisoners were herded into groups, disarmed and forced to kneel on the blood-soaked ground. The moans of the wounded, the neighing of dying horses, and the tired growling of surviving elephants, creating a tragic symphony of defeat. By late afternoon, when the crimson sun gradually set in the west, the vast battlefield had become strangely quiet. The noise of swords and cheering had ceased, giving way to the cawing of crows, and the sound of water slapping sloshily against the shore, washing away the traces of one of the bloodiest massacres in the history of the borderlands. Night fell slowly over the blood-soaked plain, hiding the most horrifying images of the day of slaughter, but could not dispel the strong smell of death rising from the mud. The rainstorm had stopped completely, leaving a crystal-clear night sky with thousands of twinkling stars, shining down on the river still rolling and flowing. The water now no longer the murky alluvial color but turned into a strange deep red hue, carrying thousands of corpses drifting downstream, telling the tragic story of a kingdom just collapsed on the cluttered battlefield. Campfires were lit, not for warmth but to cremate bodies. The Western army, though victorious, was also exhausted in both body and mind. They dragged steps among giant elephant carcasses scattered like small hills, collecting weapons and searching for surviving comrades. The moans of the wounded echoed in the night, mixed with the sad chanting of prayers by priests following the army. At the central area where the fiercest fighting took place, more than 10,000 prisoners of the southern kingdom were herded into a trembling mass of people. They were stripped of armor, hands tied behind their backs, bowing heads awaiting the victor's verdict. Among them there were also the highest-ranking generals, those who just this morning were majestic on elephant backs, now covered in mud, eyes vacant looking towards the broken war chariots. A tragic image remaining was an old war elephant, covered in arrows but still standing tall beside the body of its mahout. It refused to leave, using the trunk full of slash wounds to gently nudge the cold body of the master, emitting low moans that made even the most hardened Western soldiers stop their hands in pity. The battle by the fierce river had ended with a price too high for both sides. More than 20,000 Southern soldiers died on the spot, while the Expeditionary Army also lost thousands of elite warriors and hundreds of precious horses. This victory had thrown open the door to the mysterious eastern land for the Expeditionary Army. But the blood-red river today would forever be an indelible scar in the memories of the survivors. History had turned a page, but the roar of war elephants and the sound of waves lapping against the shore of corpses would haunt this land for many generations.